Hello everybody, my name is Sniping is Fun, and I welcome you all back to my next The 5 list. I'm going to present to all of you here on YouTube. And today's list is going to be a continuation of a series of lists I've been doing recently of the 5 video game franchises from a certain video game company that need to make a return. And this will be the third one in that said series, because I've already done one on Nintendo and another one on the Sony PlayStation. This time I'm going to be tackling a certain rival video game company that Nintendo had in the early 90s, especially in the early 90s, and they were still a rival in the mid to late 90s too, and early 2000s for that matter, and that goes to Sega. And Sega is going to be an interesting list for me to make of this, because it's going to be of a video game company that used to be a manufacturer of their own consoles and is now just a straight up game manufacturer, a third party game developer. So it's going to be kind of interesting talking about them, because a lot of their franchises seem to have kind of slightly disappeared or kind of fallen off the radar for the most part since they've dropped making consoles with the Dreamcast and have become solely a third-party developer. There's franchises that here and there, since they've just been making video games, that have come here and there and they've released, and they've also done cameos of certain characters and brought characters back for certain cameos and done certain game franchises like, collections and what the heck else ever, Wii, arcade, downloadable, Xbox, whatever kinds of things. But a lot of their franchises do seem to have disappeared when it came to them, like around the early 2000s, when they dropped out of actually making consoles and just became a third-party developer. So actually doing a list for them is actually quite interesting in that regard, because it is going to be the first and only technically entry of video game companies on this list of the 5 video game franchises from a certain company that need to make a return. That is from a company that was once their own game developer, their own system developer, and now makes video games for all the other consoles, especially like their rivals Nintendo and PlayStation. And I looked, at a list of 5 franchises I think from them truly need to make a return. And just like Nintendo and just like PlayStation, Sega has so many iconic, legendary, lovable franchises they've made since the late 80s, since they've jumped into the video game market. And there's a lot of fans of their franchises. You still see fans of Sega to this day that pretty much were back in the Nintendo versus Sega versus PlayStation wars of the 90s and whatnot. And it's like there's these franchises they still have, and there's still fans of these franchises, and they don't really use them. And I think if Sega jumped out of their Sonic bandwagon they seem to be on, because most of the time they only really do Sonic nowadays besides stuff like Yakuza and whatnot, a lot of their franchises could come back, because they have so many iconic franchises they bring back. There's so many franchises that I think would still do well in this current day and age of gaming. And I think I found the perfect 5. I think that, from their older franchises versus franchises that might have came out only a couple years ago or in the early 2000s or whatever, and haven't really seen a release, or at least any major releases, in quite some time. And let's get that started before this intro is too long with the 5 Sega franchises that need to make a return. And the first one's going to be a simple one, and I think a lot of people would probably agree with me that this franchise should make a comeback, and that's Samba De Amiga. There was one, it was originally an arcade game around 1999. It is a rhythm-based game of mostly Latin music. You shake the maracas. And it's just a fun rhythm game. It's like Sega doesn't really have too many rhythm games. I think this is like their only rhythm game. And I know the genre of rhythm games isn't really as popular now as it was back like in the late 90s, early 2000s, when you had DDR and when the boom came with stuff like Guitar Hero and Rock Band and whatnot. But I think there's still a place in the gaming industry for stuff like Samba De Amiga, for rhythm-based games. And Samba De Amiga was almost one of the originators of the genre, along stuff like Dance Dance Revolution. And it is a lovable franchise. They had the major arcade game, and they released it a year later on the Dreamcast in 2000, and they added some games on it. And then they did like a Wii port of it way back ahead, like in 2008, with extra DLC songs and extra online stuff to do. And I think it's a series, or if I could even call it that, because it's really only 2 games, that I think a lot of Sega fans especially have a fond memory of. And there are gamers out there that have either grown up way back when it was on Dreamcast and in the arcades and actually had to shake the maraca sticks, or might have recently played it with the Wii, and you show the Wii Remote Nunchuck, and it's like, it is a rhythm-based franchise. It is diverse from their Sega, from Sega's other franchises they do nowadays, like Yakuza and Sonic and whatnot. It's a rhythm-based game. Characters like Amigo and whatnot are really interesting characters, and they still use these characters in like Project Cross Zone and the Sega Racing and whatnot, and Sega Tennis and everything, all these spin-offs and all this other stuff. But it's like, since the Wii game came out around like 2008-ish, we haven't seen anything from Samba De Amigo, and I think a rhythm game nowadays, like one of the originators especially, I know it's not the most popular genre anymore, it's not really pushing boundaries anymore, but I think a return of said franchise would be kind of cool, because there's a lot of new Latin music you could use. There's a lot of Latin music they didn't use, and it's not like the series is only Latin music. There's a lot of music that fits that genre, and you can pick a lot of new and older, like, American-based, Japanese-based music that could work pretty freaking well with the maracas, and it's like, it's something I think they should bring back to diverse their library of games. I said the same thing with Nintendo and the same thing with Sony and the PlayStation. There's certain franchises they don't really do, that tackle certain genres, and it's like a certain genre that'd be very different for, Sega would be doing the rhythm-based game again and getting back into doing Samba de Amigo. It diversified their lineup of games they have, and I think that's a major reason Samba de Amigo should come back, besides how awesome of a franchise it really is. That's my first one. My second one goes to a classic 90s beat-em-up franchise, and you should know exactly what this is. There's been 3 of them on the Sega Genesis, and that goes to Streets of Rage. It's the easiest answer anyone could say. What franchise from Sega do you want to see make a comeback? Freaking Streets of Rage is a beat-em-up franchise that spanned from 1991 to 1993 on the Sega Genesis. There were 3 games, like I said. It was a really fun beat-em-up franchise back then that really did rival stuff like, Final Fight and Captain Commando and everything. It was during the 16-bit era, during the 5th generation of consoles, during the Sega Genesis versus the, Super Nintendo, was one of the best beat-em-up franchises from back then. I didn't grow up a Sega kid, I grew up a Nintendo kid. And I will even say, for the most part, Streets of Rage is a bit better than Final Fight, especially the first one, the first of each franchise. Final Fight started coming back later on with like 2 and 3. But Streets of Rage was one of the biggest 16-bit era beat-em-up games. And we've seen, Double Dragon made a return. They finally made a new Double Dragon for, an indie game, for a downloadable game. Why can't the same thing happen to Streets of Rage? It's a fun beat-em-up game. You could have 2 or 3 characters. You could make Axel or Skate or what the heck else ever. It includes some new characters. HDify it. Make it a fun beat-em-up game you could play with 3 to 4 players, maybe online, split screen, whatever, single screen, whatever. Just a fun beat-em-up game. Like, beat-em-up games are still popular. People still like beat-em-up games. Maybe it's because I grew up in that era and I still love beat-em-up games, but there's still a place for that thing. It's just, pointless fun, just kicking the crap out of enemies and just going through the bosses and going through the stages. And I really would like to see the return of Streets of Rage, because it's like, if Double Dragon can make a return, and that's an iconic, beat 'em up franchise, Streets of Rage could easily make a return as well. My next franchise, the third one on this list, will go to a tactical role-playing game / dating sim. And you're like, when did Sega ever do that? And I, if you say something like that, I would understand, because this franchise has only ever had one release outside of Japan, and that goes to Sakura Wars. For those of you who don't know what Sakura Wars is, it's basically a tactical role-playing game / dating sim. There's been 5 games of it since then. It started back in the Saturn in 1996, and the only game that ever came out outside of Japan was the 5th entry, which was a 2005 game, and it was not even released in 2005. It was released, in 2010 on the PlayStation 2 and on the Wii. Sakura Wars So Long My Love, if you ever played that game. And it's a fun franchise. It's something I would love to experience more, because I think there's more story to tell and more stuff to do. And it's an interesting concept of a tactical role-playing game with a dating sim elements, because basically I've played and own So Long My Love, and it's fun. It's like basically each chapter you have a dating sim element where you do like a visual novel story based element before the main battle, and you basically have your main character interact with all the female characters and all the side characters, and depending on how you do the chapter, you build bonds with them, so when you go into battle with them, your teammates actually team up and can, depending on if you do a bad job or good job, you might have an easier or worse time when you go into the main tactical battlefield, aspect of the game of each chapter, where you move your giant mech suits around and fight the enemies. So basically kind of like Advance Wars, Fire Emblem, Final Fantasy Tactics type of thing, where you move or Disgaea if you want to go with that, or stuff like Shining Force or whatever. Just you move your units around the field and you battle various various like enemies, and it's just a weird, wacky anime story where you build your units up through dating some parts of the chapters, and then you go into big tactical thing. If that sounds like your thing, well, there you go. It's fun, and it's like, they only ever released one game outside Japan, and I thought it was a pretty fun game. I thought it was an interesting concept. You don't see that many games like of that genre and of that type outside of Japan, and it was original for me. It's like, it stood out as one of the third-party games I played on the Wii that was actually kind of fun. And it's like, I would love to see them maybe go back and translate the first 4 games, and then maybe jump into like Sakura Wars 6 or something. It's like, I like the series, even though I've only really played one entry, and it's like, I want to see more of it. And I don't know if there's other gamers out there that personally would like agree with me on that, but I do think there would be at least some, because the franchise does seem pretty popular, and it's probably one of those franchises that people imported to play, and they did make an anime off it, so it must be pretty freaking popular. So yeah, Sakura Wars needs to make a return. Then 4th one on this list, we'll go to another classic franchise from Sega from their 90s days, and that goes to the run-and-gun shooter Gunstar Heroes, which was a 1993 Genesis game about, you run and gun, you shoot your enemies. If you played something like Contra, you understand exactly what Gunstar Heroes is like. They made a sequel to it on the GBA in 2005. It is a fun series of just co-op gameplay. You get your best bud, a family member, and jump in and run and gun, shoot your enemies up Contra style, and it's just good old-fashioned fun. And it's a classic franchise from Sega that they seem to have forgotten since they've jumped into being third party. I mean, a Game Boy Advance, like I said, they've gotten a sequel on the Game Boy Advance. They've done, we're going to put it as a downloadable game on the Wii shop, or the Xbox shop, or the PlayStation store, or whatever, So they've done downloadable versions of it. They've done a sequel to it one time, and it's like, can't you do like another one or something new? It's like, in this day and age, we need some more local multiplayer based games, and Sega has a bunch of them. And Gunstar Heroes is that fun, plain, just get your best bud and just jump in, get some pizza, get some soda, and just play with them. And it's like couch gameplay. It's like, and it's just an awesome series with awesome music, awesome art style, awesome boss battles and enemies and stages. It's just, can't we see a return of this, Sega? Come on, stop. You could tone down the Sonic and do a little more of your other stuff. And that's 4 of them. My 5th one is going to go to a turn-based tactical RPG series from them, which, like I said, I just mentioned one with Sakura Wars, but this one is without the dating sim elements. So if you want one that doesn't have dating sim elements in it, this goes to Shining Force. Shining Force has been around since 1993 on the Genesis. It has had multiple games since then, a lot of them being spin-offs. And this is a franchise, like all the other 4 I mentioned, haven't really had games in X amount of years. Like Sakura Wars hasn't really had one in about like 12 years, even though they ported it over for us, localized it for us in 2010. The Sakura Wars So Long My Love came out in 2005. We haven't had Gunstar Heroes or Streets of Rage since the 90s, Samba De Amiga since the Wii. They haven't had a game in X amount of years. Shining Force technically in the last couple years has had spin-off games on like the PSP and phone games and everything, but it's like, we haven't had a main entry in this. That's the reason why I'm including this. Yes, the series is still technically around, but we haven't had a main Shining game, main Shining Force game in a long time. I think since like the PS2 or something. And it's like, it is a turn-based tactical RPG game. You move your units around the battlefield, kind of like a Fire Emblem or a Disgaea, and you go into battle like more like, it is a turn-based RPG. So when you get to your enemies, it's like a turn-based RPG, but it's on the field. You move your units around, and it is a long-standing iconic franchise from them. And it's like, they don't have many RPGs nowadays. They don't really use too many franchises nowadays in RPGs. So why can't we see a return of this when it would be, like I said, a genre differentiation from what they normally do? And it's like, it'd be different from Sonic, be different from Yakuza, be different from whenever they bring out Shenmue 3. You know, that kind of thing. It's like, that's what we need from companies nowadays. Especially, I mentioned it with Nintendo, like in PlayStation. I mentioned at the early part of this video. I mentioned franchises that need to make a return for these companies to have a differentiation, like of some variety in the lineup of games they bring out. And I think Sega focusing on some of their RPGs like Sakura Wars and Shining Force would actually be pretty different. And you could, like, and that's what I'm saying. Like, it does have games still nowadays, but they're all like phone games and little spin-offs. We haven't had a main entry in this series in a freaking long ass time. So can we please, Sega, have a new Shining Force game, a main one on like the PS4 and the Switch? Hello. So that is my 5 Sega franchises that need to make a return: Samba De Amiga, Sakura Wars, Streets of Rage, Gunstar Heroes, and Shining Force. I hope you guys like this list. Put in the comment section what you guys think. Do you guys agree with these 5 franchises? Do you want to see these 5 franchises back? And what Sega franchises do you particularly want to see that I didn't mention in this video? Hope you guys like this video. Peace. Please subscribe if you want to. Have a lovely day, and see you all later in my next The 5 list. See you later.